Okay, so this here is the Team Losi Double XCR. I think it might be the BK edition, not completely sure. I know the front tower is quite possibly a Losi Double X tower, but the rest of it is I believe, a CR. Anyway, I picked this up quite some time ago, and it's sort of been in the backlog of things to work on, and I figured at some point I'd want to get around to restoring it. So I started to take it apart and try to clean up the parts, and what I found was that the previous owner actually like glued a lot of things together. Like major parts like the tower to the bulkhead, those were glued. The bulkhead was glued to the chassis, the gearbox was glued to the bulkhead, you know, the speed control and servo were glued to the chassis. Everything was glued. So it took a lot of work to just sort of like rip that stuff apart. And then the chassis itself wasn't in particularly great shape. Actually, I have it over here. It's this right here. So, you know, it's usable, but, you know, these are all the areas where stuff was glued on, and I tried to get as much of the glue off as I could. But I noticed also this part here was cut up for some reason. So I happened to find a new or a less used Double X chassis on eBay, so I just picked that up and figured I would use this one as a spare. So then I got to work on just putting this back together. Hold on, let me just take the wing and body off just for a second here. So here comes the wing, the body. Okay, so the actual putting together of this didn't take that long. It took me about an evening. It's a relatively simple car to take apart and put together. Let's see, let's start with the back. I didn't do a whole lot to the back. The car came with CVDs. I initially thought about running a hydro drive in this, but I figured against it. And one good thing the owner did was to put high torque slipper pads onto the gears here, and it looks like almost like a B4 like slipper assembly. So okay, that's decent. I did a rear transmission brace here. I've showed you guys this on the Double XT and the mid-motor Double X as well. Wanted to make sure to run this, and everything else. What did I do? I think I re-greased the diff. The diff was already pretty smooth. I greased the gears a little bit. The idler gear looks like it might be a little worn, but it's okay for now. And just in running it, it runs really smooth. That's one thing I noticed about this car. It feels very smooth on throttle. Now maybe some of that's just because of the motor speed control combination, but it does feel pretty nice. Another thing I noticed, and I don't know if this is strictly speaking true or not, because I haven't actually made any measurements, but it kind of looks like the gearbox for the Double X might have a slightly lower center of gravity than the gearbox for the RC10, the Stealth gearbox. Maybe some folks out there have actually made measurements of that, but you know, people who use the Double X and swear by it tend to comment on like how well it handles and how nicely it drives. And I'm thinking, well, maybe some of that could be geometry related or weight distribution related. So I wonder about the CG of the rear gearbox, because it does look like maybe it's a little bit lower. Other than that, let's see, for the rear suspension, it did take me some time to tune in the rear shocks. And I'm not going to sit here and say that they're like perfectly tuned or anything. But initially what I did is run the stock pistons, I think they're red pistons, and they're still in there, with maybe 32.5 or 35 weight oil and Losi pink springs. I found that to be way too soft. So I just set up like a basic jump here in the basement, not too tall, maybe about that tall or so, just this, and you know, this kind of an angles, you know, slightly sharp, just to see how the car would take to jumps. And the rear really slapped the jump face with that kind of spring and shock setup, even if I set the ride height a little bit on the high side, and even if I moved the shock mounting position to the inside hole on the arm. It just wasn't quite enough damping or spring rate, I think, on the shocks. So I went a little bit stiffer. I went up to a 40 weight oil in the rear with the red Losi pistons. Then I went to an associated yellow rear spring, which I think is a 2.4 rate. The Losi pink spring is a 2.3, so a slightly stiffer spring. Maybe you can get away with a pink spring, but this combination seems to work pretty nicely with the inner hole on the arm used to mount the shock, and I'm on the well, this hole right here on the tower, so one hole from the inside, and that really jumps and lands very nicely, at least on this, you know, the simple jump that I made in the basement here. So generally at the track in Virginia at Adrenaline RC at Vonats earlier this year, I found that I needed a soft rear suspension to really get the car to hook up when I ran my Traxxas TRX3. And this might be slightly stiffer than that, but again, it's a different car. So if I run this at Vonats this year, at least during open practice, we'll see if it's a little too stiff or not. I'm not completely sure. Let's see, so there's that. And then going to the front here, actually, we'll just go to the battery. So I'm not sure if this is like a custom-made part or not, but generally, if you want to run like a full-sized shorty lipo, like a 4.2 amp hour lipo, the height of this brace here is too short to accommodate that. So I run a, I'm not sure exactly what the right term is, but it's kind of like a lower profile lipo. That's a 3 amp hour lipo. Okay, this is the perfect size to fit in here, and I run it all the way up front, and I just use foam spacers in the back. And well, when I say I run it, it's just that's how I've set it up so far. I haven't actually raced this car yet, but that seems to do fine. And then for the front, I did a lot of the same things I did for the mid-motor XX. So the A&L Factory Works carbon fiber brace for the upper brace, I put that in. And then what else did I do? I have the JC Racing Products front XX arms. These are beefier than the stock XX arms. I may want to order another set of these just in case I happen to break a pair. And I have the Moto Obscura aluminum front bulkhead here. So that adds a little bit more weight to the front, should help it corner a bit better. This, I do believe, is the Losi XX tower because it has that fourth hole on the outside there. And the XX CR tower has a slightly different shape with just 3 holes on the inside. And then I think the BK tower is essentially this shape without that extra hole on the outside for whatever reason. I think that's how it goes, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. I did have to replace the front bumper. This I actually made out of Kydex, so I had to sort of cut it to the correct shape and size, because what ended up happening was when I was doing the jump testing, when setting up the suspension, it was kicking so bad like this that on landing, it actually snapped the front lip of the bumper. So Kydex bumper is a bit stronger, and these, you know, they don't, it's very hard to find replacement bumpers anyway, so I figured I would just do this. It didn't take that long to put together. The front shocks, I think I'm running, actually let me get my setup sheet here. So I have keep a notebook of all the things I do with setups. So I have the stock black 3-hole pistons here in the shocks with 32.5 weight oil and green front springs. With that, it does feel, you know, maybe slightly under damped. So you might want to go up to 35 weight or 37.5 weight if you really want like better matching between the spring rate and the damping. The green spring, I think, is a 3.5 pounds per inch spring rate. So maybe slightly thicker oil would do well here, but for now I'll just keep it. Lunsford turnbuckles, that's what came with the car. And that's kind of it. I don't think there's much else to say about this. I do like it. It's, you know, again, it's not as tunable as the TRX3. The TRX3, in my opinion, is the most tunable vintage two-wheel drive buggy. There's a lot that you can do with that buggy. But this does drive very nicely for what it is, and you might not need all that tuning anyway. We'll see. So then the question is, where am I going to run this? Should I run it at the next RC10 Talk race, which may be in the spring? If not then, it'll be next fall. Or should I run it at the Vintage Off-Road Nationals? Now, given that I went to the RC10 Talk race this past, what was it, October? I find that, you know, there are certainly differences between that track and Adrenaline RC in Virginia. The Adrenaline track in Virginia is a bit smoother and more accommodating to cars that are maybe a bit more frail. So like, you know, all the Losi stuff I have, the X Factory X5, the Losi XX4, that kind of stuff, I would maybe tend to prefer to run that at the Vintage Off-Road Nationals. The Insanity RC track, now granted, when we had the event in October, it was toward the end of the season. The track was already beaten up pretty bad. So it was really rough. And, you know, although a couple of guys did run Losi cars there, I personally would not. That's a little too risky for how abusive the track conditions were for cars on that day. So I'm thinking, you know, maybe for the RC10 Talk races, I would tend towards my Kyosho stuff, because that stuff's a bit stronger, a bit more resilient. And then for the Vintage Off-Road Nationals, I could run like the lighter, let's say more frail stuff. So maybe I'll bring this to Vonats this year as part of the two-wheel drive buggy assortment, which will include the mid-motor XX and the Traxxas TRX3, which is my known quantity. So really it's going to come down to how this does against the TRX3 during open practice. And since I have the TRX3 pretty well sorted out, hopefully I'll be able to spend less time going through the two-wheel drive buggies this time around, and I can focus more on the four-wheel drive buggies. I have a big collection of four-wheel drive buggies I want to run. Anyway, that's a side discussion. So the short story is I have a XX CR. I do like it. It's nice, and we will see how it does when I get to race it. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching.